Welcome back, everybody, to the next episode here of the podcast. We've got a pretty fun episode. Now that the NFL season is around the corner, we will start our prediction series, if you will. We'll be going over two divisions today, along with talking about the MLB All-Star break, the NBA offseason, and a new segment at the end with our fun and games. So as always, I'm joined by Nick and Nader. If you want to say hi to everyone.
Hello, everyone. It's been a very long time, and I'm glad to be back.
Yes, it is certainly good to be back. We're not going to waste any time, and we're going to get started with our predictions for the AFC and NFC North. So we'll start here our predictions with the AFC North, which has been consistently one of the best divisions in the NFL. And I think on paper, there's no reason to think that won't be the case again. We'll start with the team who won the division last year, the Baltimore Ravens. They got the number one seed. They almost made the Super Bowl, losing in the AFC Championship. And this team is interesting to me because I feel like they really didn't get that much better over the offseason. They lost some pieces, in division specifically. Geno Smith to the Bengals, Patrick Queen to the Steelers, etc. And they really did not have the flexibility to add talent per se. They're hoping that some of the young players that they've drafted over the last couple of years can take steps. Travis Jones, Trenton Simpson, etc. So offensively, obviously everything starts and ends with Lamar Jackson. He won his second MVP last year. There's no reason to think the offense should take much of the step down, especially considering they added Derrick Henry, which was one of the few major additions they had. I still believe in Derrick Henry. I get that he is getting a little bit older, but compared to some of the older running backs in the NFL, I feel like he's aged a little bit more gracefully. Certainly could see the wheels fall off, given that he's like 30 at this point and he's taken a beating throughout his career. But he really hasn't regressed that much, per se. This isn't 2020 prime Derrick Henry, but I think he's still very effective, especially in this offense. The passing game is what it is. I'm curious to see if any of these receivers break out. Zay Flowers had a good rookie year. Rashad Bateman's a player who I was high on. He's been disappointing, but the Ravens did give him a small extension, so they still believe in him. So because of that, I want to hold out a little bit of hope. But regardless, the Ravens' offense should be very similar to what it's been in the past, but now they actually have an elite running back with Lamar in the backfield. Defensively, they should be pretty good. My question is if somebody can really take the load as an elite pass rusher with Justin Madubuike, who had a phenomenal season last year, but can somebody else step up? Will we see a big leap from Odafe Owe? Will we see a big leap from David Ojabo? And then in the secondary, I'm a little bit concerned about the cornerback room. Their projected starters are Marlon Humphrey and Brandon Stephens, which isn't great. Marlon Humphrey's not the player he once was. Brandon Stephens is adequate. Nate Wiggins certainly could make an impact as a first rounder, but other than Wiggins, I wasn't all that high on the Ravens draft this year. I still expect the Ravens to be good this year, and I predict that they will make the playoffs, but I could see them taking a step back. Let's look at Cleveland now. They ended up finishing in second place last season. And the question with the Browns is, what version of Deshaun Watson are we getting? Are we getting good Deshaun Watson, or are we getting bad Deshaun Watson? We've seen the highs with him in Houston, but he hasn't been the same player in Cleveland, and it's no longer an issue of sample size, especially considering once he didn't play in the second half of the year and Joe Flacco was in, Flacco was substantially better. So this is certainly a prove-it year for Deshaun Watson. If he doesn't have a good season this year, not to say the Browns will replace him because they probably can't, but there will be some ugly discussions about him as a football player and not so much off the field. I think their offense is fine. I'm definitely curious to see if Nick Chubb is able to bounce back. He has not regressed at all, but he's also getting older. He's coming off a second ACL tear. So that does lead me to believe that he could take a step back this year. And if he does, that could prove to be trouble. They still made the playoffs without him last year, but I'm not overly confident that they would have the same luck. They do have some good players, though, on the rest of the offense. Amari Cooper is still very underrated. David Njoku had a career year. They gave Jerry Jeudy big money. They have high expectations for him. But overall, if Nick Chubb does not come back to form, I do fear that this offense could be a little bit below average. But obviously the strength of this team is the defense. You and I both agree that Myles Garrett is the probably best defensive player in the NFL. He certainly deserved to win Defensive Player of the Year last season. Zadarius Smith pairs up with him on the edge. And their secondary is obviously really strong. Will we get another leap from a guy like Martin Emerson, who I think has been pretty solid? Denzel Ward is obviously quite good. Grant Delpit's turned into a nice player, as is Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. He finally turned out to be the prospect that I thought he was a couple years ago when I believed he was one of the best defensive players in that class. I think the Browns roster is good. I think their coaching is pretty good. But being in a tough division with a second place schedule and very questionable quarterback play, I think they could be a team who looks at regression as well. I feel like last season was the ceiling for this kind of Browns team, and I'm concerned that they won't have the same luck again. Let's move to the Steelers now. The Steelers are perpetually in the middle, and I could see that being the case again this year. I think this roster isn't necessarily a middle-tier roster. I think they are below that. I think this is comfortably on paper the worst team in the division. But as long as they have Mike Tomlin and as long as they have adequate quarterback play, they will always be in contention for the 7th seed. And I think their quarterback play will be better this year. Russell Wilson was not abysmal last year in Denver. He's obviously not the player he once was. But he wasn't as bad as 2022 Russell Wilson. And if things flame out, they also have Justin Fields. Both of these guys are not great, obviously. They're lower tier starting quarterbacks, but I think they're both top 32 QBs in the NFL. So I think that's more than the Steelers really could say for much of last year. And I think this offense was quite a bit better once they fired Matt Canada. I feel like we finally saw Najee Harris actually play legitimately well. And I'm excited to see another year out of George Pickens. But outside of that, the offense does have some questions. What about the offensive line? Will Broderick Jones take a step up? How will Troy Fautanu perform as a rookie? I think this offense could be quite a bit better than people think, but they still need a lot of things to go well. Defensively, obviously, they've got some good players. TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith on the edge. Another year of development for a young guy like Keanu Benton. I think Patrick Queen being added into the middle of this defense is going to be a really good pickup. And I think Joey Porter Jr. in the secondary is somebody who absolutely could break out and become one of the 10 to 15 best corners in the NFL this year. He had a really strong rookie year. But this Steelers defense, while it has top-end talent, there are some question marks. Will Cameron Hayward continue to produce as he's gotten older? Dante Jackson, their slated second corner. He was not very good over the past few seasons in Carolina. Age and injury has caught up to him. Will that be an issue for them? Minka Fitzpatrick's a good safety, but at strong safety, they have Deshaun Elliott, who has been up and down throughout his career. What are they going to get from him? So I think this Steelers team has a wider range of outcomes than people think. I think they're the favorite to finish last in the division because I think they had the worst roster here. But again, I've learned not to doubt Mike Tomlin. Knowing this team, they will win 9 games, they will get the 7th seed, and they will lose by 20 in the first round. And then we'll wrap things up with the Cincinnati Bengals. I think the Bengals are going to bounce back in a big way this year. They get a last-place schedule. They get a healthy Joe Burrow. I thought they had a fantastic offseason, especially if T. Higgins is going to play this year. I believe that this is the team to beat in this division. I think that Joe Burrow is the best quarterback in the AFC North. I think him and Lamar are pretty interchangeable. If you put Lamar over Burrow, I'm not going to question it. I would probably rank them 3 and 4 in some order. But if I had to pick, I would probably lean Joe Burrow. I think the rest of this offense is better. I think they're going to have an upgraded running back going from Joe Mixon to Zach Moss. Moss had a good season last year with the Colts while Joe Mixon is slowing down. Obviously, the receivers are quite good. Jamar Chase is one of the best in the league. T. Higgins is quite good as well. The offensive line should be better. If Amarius Mims wins a starting job, I think he'll be farther along than people think. This offense should be one of the better units in the NFL, and I really like what they've done with the defense. And I think with all of the youth here, we're going to see a lot of players break out, especially in the secondary. Cam Taylor-Britt, I think he could have a big year. DJ Turner, I really liked him coming out of Michigan. Dax Hill as well. I'm not entirely sure where they're going to play him, but they'll figure it out. They have good linebackers. They have a pretty good defensive line. I think that's kind of the one question with this team if you're going to have a true secondary pass rusher behind Trey Hendrickson. But that's really the only major concern other than probably a little bit of the offensive line. If the Bengals have good play in the trenches, I think this will be one of the 5 best teams in the NFL. And it's hard to not go into the year thinking this team's a Super Bowl contender, even though they were disappointing last year.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, the AFC North is definitely one of the better, if not the best, division in football, where we saw, I believe, all 4 teams last year go above 500, which is, I think, the first time we've ever seen that happen. I know it's definitely the first time I've seen that happen in the 17 game era. And I'm going to start with the Pittsburgh Steelers because I think they might be the team that improved the most from last year, specifically looking at the quarterback position, going from Kenny Pickett, who was out the door on the other side of the state, and you bring in Russell Wilson, who, while doesn't have the best reputation in the 2020s now, he wasn't the worst guy on the roster for the Broncos last year. He was not the reason they were losing games. Sean Payton wanted to restart and get his guy, Bo Nix, apparently, and he did not want Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson wasn't terrible. Was it Russell Wilson's fault they let the Dolphins score 70 on them? I'm not too sure. But I think Russ is a guy who can come in, kind of get a more hard-headed coach like Mike Tomlin to kind of reel him in, make sure he doesn't do the shenanigans that he was doing down in Denver, and to go out and just kind of lock in, and all he has to do is be a game manager. He has some weapons to work with. Najee Harris is starting to become a more underrated running back in the league. I think he started to show that he can do as a good running back and kind of reel in himself. But if he starts to take a step back, you have Jalen Warren, which is one of the better, if not one of the best backup backs in the league, and is a phenomenal receiving back, which is going to help for the not the greatest receiver core in the room. George Pickens is really good, but we're kind of waiting for that big breakout year from him to see if he can kind of solidify himself as a wide receiver one. And they drafted Rowan Wilson to see if he can continue the Steelers' legacy of drafting day 2 receivers and then becoming amazing. But the big question is going to be that offensive line to see if the 2 or 3 rookies that might end up starting actually play well. Troy Vitanu and Zach Frazier are slotted to be starters at left tackle and center. Well, you also have Mason McCormick, who could take over for one of the guard spots with either Sayamalo or James Daniels. And you have Roger Jones becoming a full-time starter after he was drafted in the first round last year. So it's going to be a very young and very rookie-heavy offensive line, and we're going to see if that's going to help. But I do think having mobile quarterbacks in Russ, and if you need it, Justin Fields would help out with that if they do end up struggling. Obviously, you would prefer them to not have to run and actually throw the ball, but we'll see how that goes. And I think they just wanted to come in with the defense and just kind of keep how it's going. You have TJ Watt, you have Cam Hayward, but you went out and you got your big linebacker and Patrick Queen, who had a big breakout season last year. I don't know if he's going to be as good as he was last year, this year without Mike McDonald and now on a different team, but if he can bring 70% of what he was last year, this will be a good acquisition for the Steelers. Sean Elliott's going to be fine at safety, I think. They have Minka Fitzpatrick, who's going to be that guy. They got Dante Jackson for the Panthers. They have Joey Porter Jr., who's going to come and break out. After 8 weeks, they might get known criminal Cam Sutton, so we'll see how that goes. I do think the Steelers are going to be one of the more weaker teams in this division, probably the favorite to be last place. But I think there's a world where they get game manager Russell Wilson, or they get a breakout Justin Fields, and they win 9-10 games and might sneak into a wild card spot. But I don't think they're going to come out and win the division because you have the Baltimore Ravens, who were just the 1 seed last year, and I think they're coming out swinging. They made the big signing of Derrick Henry to come in and be that lead back. Since Lamar's taken over as the number 1 guy here in Baltimore, he has not had a elite running back. It's been the Gus Edwards show, the week 1.5 of J.K. Dobbins every year, the Justice Hill, the Keaton Mitchell. That's not what we need. Lamar wants Derrick Henry to not have to rely on Lamar's legs, to let Derrick Henry run the show, and if he's slowing down, Lamar can take off. Because Lamar showed last year that he can be an elite passer at the quarterback position, and he doesn't have to use his legs. He can throw the ball, and he'll throw the ball down your throats, and he'll win the game just like that. He is an elite passer, I think, and I think he's really good at playing quarterback, you know? He doesn't have to run, and he doesn't have to anymore with Derrick Henry, and I think the weapons are gonna have to step up besides Derrick Henry, with Zay Flowers coming in year 2, wants that big sophomore jump, and maybe it'll take year 4, but maybe Rashad Bateman can do something. and you get a full season of Mark Andrews after he was hurt for a good portion of last year. They were able to get the 1 seed without him, but I do think having a full year of Mark Andrews is going to be a big thing for the Ravens here. I do think the offensive line is going to be a bit of a question to see if Ronnie Stanley stays healthy and to see if the rest of the offensive line besides Linderbaum play well, because that was definitely a weakness of the Ravens last year was the offensive line. I do want to see them kind of take notice of that and try to maybe go get another free agent or another trade to get a better starter at maybe right tackle or left guard. But with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, I think they'll be all right. And as for the defense, I think the biggest loss for the Ravens was a loss of Mike McDonald. I think losing him to the Seattle Seahawks is going to be the biggest downfall of them. I don't think their defense is going to be as good as it was last year, but I think it's still going to be good enough to be able to help them get to the playoffs. Because last year we saw guys like Kyle Van Noy get 10-plus sacks. Odafe Owe started the breakout. We saw Matabuike as a nose tackle get 13 sacks. He came out and said, hey, I can be that guy, and he's here to stay. And he got the big extension, and he wants to win in Baltimore. We're going to see if Matabuike, Odafe Owe, Roquan Smith, we're going to see if Trenton Simpson can take up the Patrick Queen spot. We're going to see if Kyle Hamilton can show that he is the best safety in football. If Marcus Williams can be a good safety still, and to see if maybe Kyle Hamilton's going to play corner a lot, because Marlon Humphrey's kind of getting older, and the rest of the corners are not good. Their slotted number 2 corner is, let's see, Brandon Stevenson, Arthur Mollett. Like, why are we starting these guys? You have Nate Wiggins, sure. He'll probably come in and start soon, but he might not be ready, you know? I think they're waiting for the Nate Wiggins, they're waiting for the TJ Tampa to come in and be ready, and I don't think it's going to happen. It's going to take a little bit for them to get ready, and if we have Brandon Stevens and Jalen Amar Davis as your starters, it's not going to end well. I do think they're going to be the favorite to probably win the division. It's going to be between them and the returning Cincinnati Bengals, who did finish last in the division last year, but that was because of an injury to Joe Burrow, and I think he is clearly come out and said he is ready to go. He is coming in hot, coming in swinging, and wants the crown back in the AFC North Division. And I think keeping T. Higgins is the biggest thing that they could have done for Joe Burrow and his success. I think if you had to get rid of T. Higgins, you probably would have drafted someone in this draft, but keeping T. Higgins means you get to draft somewhere else, and you get to draft Marius Mims. And if he ends up starting, there's going to be a big guy at right tackle stopping the T.J. Watts and the Miles Garrett's of the world. I think it's going to be a little bit of a stretch for the interior O-line to kind of help out there, but we'll see if they can keep Joe Burrow alive. You have Mike Gesicki at tight end now. It's been a while since Joe Burrow's had a reliable tight end. You drafted Jermaine Burton to see if his character issues end up being a problem or if he can be a good receiver and see if he can actually pull up and replace the loss of Tyler Boyd. Of course, you have Jamar Chase, one of the top 5 receivers in football. I think Zach Moss as a full starter is going to be really interesting to see. We saw him take over for Jonathan Taylor last year in the Colts, and he played really well. I think it's a bit of a downgrade offensive line-wise for him, but I do think if he can kind of continue what he was doing last year, this might be an upgrade for them. I know you already mentioned that, but I do think that if he can bring 80-90% of what he was last year, that's going to be better than what Joe Mixon was last year. And for their defense, I do think there are a bit of a questions. They lost Jobe Wuzier, so they kind of need some help at corner. Cam Taylor-Britt's going to need a breakout. I believe they're going to have Dax Hill playing the corner, so we're going to see if he can step up and be a starting corner. Their starting safeties right now are only Geno Stone and Jordan Battle, so we'll kind of see how that goes. Geno Stone, the 3rd safety for the Ravens the past couple of years. I think he led the league in interceptions with him or the Cowboys corner, whose name is blanking on me right now. But Mike Hilton in the slot, Dax Hill, Cam Taylor-Britt, a lot of young guys. Going to see if they can turn up DJ Turner as well, see if they can progress and show they belong here. The linebacker unit is going to be solid with Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt, Keem Davis-Gaither, Eagles legend. And we're going to see if the edge rushing group, besides Trey Hendrickson, who requested a trade towards around the draft, I believe. So we'll see if he's going to stay on the team. We're going to see if they can try and get another guy besides him. Because the next best bet is probably Sam Hubbard, who's the greatest player in the world, but it's something. It's not the worst thing. I do think the division is going to come between the Bengals and the Ravens, barring any injuries, as long as Burrow stays healthy. And the last team for the division, the Cleveland Browns, I think it's going to be the same as last year. You're going to have the elite defense. You're going to have the Myles Garrett. You have Darius Smith. JOK finally broke out. You're going to see top 10 linebacker play for him. We ended up getting Devin Bush and Jordan Hicks. I think those are really good guys to play as your second linebacker. You get Denzel Ward at the corner, Greg Newsome at corner. Martin Emerson broke out last year. He looks to be a guy who's going to come out and play well. You have Grant Delpit and Juan Thornhill, who I think are both pretty good safeties. Grant Delpit had a big breakout last year. I think the defense is good. It's going to continue to be that top 5 unit. I just think the issue comes with the offense, to where if Deshaun Watson plays like Browns Deshaun Watson or Texans Deshaun Watson. If he plays like Texans Deshaun Watson, they win the division. I don't think it's close. But if they get what they've been getting with Deshaun Watson, it's going to be a tough road for the Browns. Because your backup's Jameis Winston, who, in theory, could even play better than Deshaun Watson. But if you get Nick Chubb at not his full strength, or if you have to rely on Jerome Ford or Dante Foreman, I think it might be a long season for the Browns. You went out and you traded for Jerry Jeudy, and I do think that's a good get between him, Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore. I think that is a good addition for them to help out whoever ends up playing quarterback for them all year. David Njoku was at tight end, top 5 offensive line. The quarterback position is the biggest question mark on this roster. If they had a top 15 quarterback, I might pick the Browns to win the division quite clearly. But because of the weakness they have with Deshaun Watson and Jameis Winston, I don't trust them to continue what they did last year, because they were phenomenal last year. They would have been the 2 seed if they weren't in the same division as the Browns. And I think there's a world where they win a lot of games. They win 12, 13 games, but it's always going to depend on the quarterback position. And I'm just not ready for them to do that again.
Okay, so if I had to say a final order before we move to the NFC North, I think I would lean Bengals, Ravens, Browns, Steelers. Certainly subject to change, but I think that's where I lean as of now.
Yeah, I think it's going to definitely be between the Ravens and the Bengals. But I think if I had to pick right now, sitting in July, I'm gonna say Bengals, Ravens, Browns, Steelers. I'm gonna go the same as you, but you have to a week from now, I could go back to the Ravens.
That brings us into the NFC North, which I think is going to be one of the more interesting divisions, because I think all 4 teams could be good. I think some of these teams have pretty high ceilings, but some of them also have low floors. We'll start with the Detroit Lions, who won the division last year, nearly made it to the Super Bowl. We do not need to go over that NFC Championship game again. But this team is really interesting because even though the Lions were really good last year, they had some clear weaknesses. And I think most of those weaknesses have been filled, which leads me to wondering what the floor and what the ceiling is for this team. Starting with the ceiling of, can this team win the Super Bowl? And given how close the Lions were last year, with notable weaknesses that I think have been answered, I think the easy answer to that question is yes, they certainly can if all goes well and you get another good season out of Jared Goff. My question about the floor is if this team is like a legitimate lock to make the playoffs, because I think there's only 3 or 4 teams going into the year that can truly say that they're going to make the playoffs pretty much no matter what. And I feel like the Lions probably are one of those teams. Given that this is a young roster, we should expect a lot of players to improve. And again, I don't think there are many weaknesses on this team. We'll start on offense. Jared Goff got the big extension. Very well deserved. You know what you're going to get out of him. He's not going to be the MVP or anything, but if he continues to play at a fringe top 10 level, that's all this team needs. The run game should be better. Another year of development for Jahmyr Gibbs, who showed a lot of flashes last year. I think he's hopefully going to be more consistent as a pass catcher and as a runner as well. If you remember the first 6 weeks of the year, he wasn't really much of a factor in the run game. But behind him, David Montgomery is also phenomenal. I feel like people have kind of slept on him a little bit, and I'm really hoping that Jahmyr Gibbs isn't the number 1 back and Monty's the number 2. I still hope it's a 1A, 1B kind of thing, because I think they're both fantastic. The offensive line is obviously great. I think it's the best unit in the league. As long as older players like Graham Glasgow, Kevin Zeitler don't regress massively, there's no reason to think that won't be the case again. The pass catchers are quite solid. Amon-Ra St. Brown, first-team All-Pro. Sam Laporta, second-team All-Pro, and another offseason of development for him. No reason to think Laporta won't be, at minimum, one of the 3 best tight ends in the league again this year. I wouldn't be surprised if statistically he is the leading receiver amongst tight ends in the NFL, given that he is pretty much unquestioned the second option in the passing game now. The only question with this offense is the rest of the receiving corps outside of St. Brown. Given what the Lions did at receiver in this offseason, really tells us how they feel about Jameson Williams. They are going to be giving him a big role. He is going to be a full-time starter, and they expect him to make a leap. And I expect him to do so as well. Jameson Williams is very dangerous with the ball in his hands. But the question, since we drafted him, is how easy is it to get the ball in his hands? He hasn't always been on the same page as Jared Goff. Questionable route runner at times, questionable hands at times, but I think both of those really improved throughout the season last year, and as we got to the end of the season, he really looked a lot more comfortable in the offense, and we saw it in the NFC Championship where he was absolutely phenomenal. That was the best game of his career. He is now the number 2 wide receiver for this team. He finally gets an offseason without injuries, without suspension, and I am expecting a massive season for Jameson Williams. Now, even if J-Mo does have a big season, what about the 3rd receiving spot? Donovan Peoples-Jones probably is the favorite in terms of snaps, but I think Khalif Raymond is pretty easily the 3rd best receiver on this team. I think if Donovan Peoples-Jones steps up, that'd be a bigger deal, though, because that's the type of archetype that this team needs a receiver. We have our reliable slot guy, we have our deep threat, but we need that big physical jump ball guy, kind of like what Josh Reynolds was last year with that big catch radius and those long arms. I think Josh Reynolds is going to be a much bigger loss than people realize. He was one of the unsung heroes of this team last year, and I'm worried that with him gone, that could certainly make things a little bit more challenging for the passing game, and I'm hoping that Donovan Peoples-Jones will be able to take that role and give us 75% of what Josh Reynolds did. I think the one mistake this team made this offseason, or the one big mistake, I should say, was not re-signing him because he really didn't go for that much money signing with the Broncos. Defense is where more of the questions are with this team. Obviously, the defense has been a weakness ever since, really, forever it feels like. But much of the concerns on this defense have been answered. The secondary, specifically the cornerback room, was one of the worst in the NFL last year with Cam Sutton and Kindle Vildor starting on the outside. Those guys are gone. The corner room looks a lot better. Carlton Davis is a very solid veteran. Terrion Arnold should make a big contribution as a rookie. Who's going to play the slot, though? I think it would be in our best interest to keep Brian Branch there, given how good he was last year. But I think they're going to move him over to safety, and it's going to be some combination of the Meek Robertson or the rookie Ennis Rakestraw, both of whom I think are going to be quite solid. And then back at safety, Brian Branch, again, had a fantastic rookie season last year. It'll never make sense how he fell in the middle of the second round, but no complaints here. Who else is going to start alongside him, though? I feel like Kirby Joseph feels like the obvious answer, but I honestly feel like Ifeatu Melifonwu was better last year, albeit if he wasn't a huge part of the defense until late. And I think Kirby Joseph probably is the better long-term piece, but I feel like Kirby's been a lot more inconsistent than people realize, and Ifeatu Melifonwu was great down the stretch last year. Unlike the pass defense, the run defense last year was phenomenal, and it should get better. DJ Reader is the perfect piece to add to this defensive line. We saw Aleem McNeil break out last year, and again, this run defense was legitimately one of the best in the league. Now you add DJ Reader there. If you get another year of development from a guy like Jack Campbell at linebacker, this run defense, again, should be elite. But along with the secondary, the question is the pass defense, specifically the pass rush. Aiden Hutchinson is a legit number 1 alpha pass rusher, but is there that second guy? DJ Reader and Aleem McNeil are better run defenders than they are pass rushers. So is a guy like Marcus Davenport going to perform? He's had a hard time staying on the field. What about Josh Paschal? He's shown some flashes, but we haven't really seen him turn into a consistent starter yet. Could this be the year for that? But overall, I feel like this team's in a great spot. The pass defense should be better. Hopefully the pass rush is improved. And as long as Jameson Williams takes a step and the Josh Reynolds loss isn't as big of a deal as I think, there's no reason to believe that this team won't be a contender once again this year. But there's a lot of teams behind the Lions challenging in the division. The biggest threat is probably the Green Bay Packers, who played really well down the stretch last year. They won a playoff game. Jordan Love looks really good. My thing with the Packers, though, and I feel like this also kind of applies to the Texans in the AFC, is that both teams were really inconsistent last year. They snuck into the playoffs down the stretch. They each win a playoff game. And I feel like the conversation with both of these teams has maybe gone a little bit too far. Not to say that these two teams don't have Super Bowl ceilings, because I think they both do. But I think the floor with both of them, probably Houston in particular, I think is lower than people think. I have a hard time thinking the Packers don't make the playoffs, but I think it's more possible than people think. I do expect another good year out of Jordan Love, but the rest of the offense on paper is lacking high-end talent. The run game should be solid. Josh Jacobs and Marshawn Lloyd, I think, is a better overall running back duo than what they had last year. They're deep at receiver. Jaden Reed had a solid rookie year. Romeo Doubs is a good player. Christian Watson, if he stays healthy. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if Dontavion Wicks, one of their day 3 picks last year, really turns into the guy with this receiving core. I thought he had a tremendous rookie season, and I could see him passing all of these guys in terms of the receiving core. The offensive line has some questions, but I think it's going to be better than people expect. Zach Tom's a really good player. Rasheed Walker at left tackle, I think, will be a solid replacement for David Bakhtiari. I don't think this supporting cast is as good as, say, Detroit's is, but I think the ceiling for Jordan Love is certainly higher than it is for Jared Goff. Defensively, I think this team is fine. I think the best news they got was that Joe Barry is gone, so that is addition by subtraction. But there are still some questions here. The pass rush is pretty good, but are they going to get a step from a guy like Lucas Van Ness? I thought Devontae Wyatt improved a little bit last year, but are you going to get a step out of him? What about Quay Walker in the linebacking room? Big year for him. In the secondary, Jair Alexander is great, but behind him, do you trust Eric Stokes to A, play consistently, and B, stay healthy? I don't know. I feel like health is certainly a bigger variable for a team like the Packers than most. And again, I think this team has a Super Bowl ceiling, but I think the floor is also lower than a lot of people expect. Let's transition to the Vikings now, who had a pretty big offseason. Kirk Cousins is gone. Sam Darnold probably will be the starting quarterback this year, but maybe we see J.J. McCarthy at some point. Regardless, this team probably will be favored to finish last in the NFC North, but I think compared to the other last place projected teams in the league, this team's really not that bad. Aaron Jones, I think, has a lot more left in the tank than people think. I believe he's still quite good. Obviously, Justin Jefferson at receiver. I think he's the best player in the NFL at this point. Jordan Addison's a great number 2. T.J. Hawkinson's a strong tight end. And their offensive line is one of the better units in the NFL. This is a great supporting cast for whoever plays quarterback, whether it's Darnold or McCarthy. So as long as they play at an adequate level, this offense should be pretty good. Defensively, I don't really know. I think the pass rush is going to be good, even though Danielle Hunter is gone. Jonathan Grenard and Dallas Turner on the edge, I think that's going to be a really good duo. Blake Cashman, I thought, was a phenomenal signing as well. Him and Grenard coming over from the Texans, 2 of the bigger pieces in that defense last year. The secondary, though, could be questionable. The cornerback room really isn't great. Harrison Smith is aging as well. I think the defense could be not so good this year. So even if the offense and the quarterback position overperform, I am concerned about this defense, and I think that's why the Vikings probably are projected to finish last, even though they have a good organization, good culture. I can't see them winning 4 or 5 games. They're definitely going to be better than that, but I think the ceiling with them is low. I don't know if I can say the same about the Bears. If Caleb Williams jumps onto the scene and is phenomenal this year, the ceiling for this team could be pretty high. Maybe not Super Bowl high, but quite high. A lot of people are picking the Bears to make the playoffs, and I can't really argue against it. If Caleb Williams is an average to above average quarterback this year, I think the rest of the team is good enough. The run game should be solid. DeAndre Swift, Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson, that's a pretty good group. Their receiving trio, I think, is pretty comfortably the best in the league with DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze. I don't think there's any team that can comfortably say they have 3 top 25 to 30 receivers in the league. The Bears do, though. The offensive line should be able to take a step up. Devin Jenkins is a good player. Braxton Jones, if he takes another leap. Same with Darnell Wright. The offense is a really good group around Caleb Williams, and if he's a good player, this offense will be one of the better ones in the league. Defensively, they've been pretty bad over the last couple of years, but as last season went along, their defense really improved, and I think it could be one of the better units in the league. The pass rush I'm curious to see if anybody is the true number 2 behind Montez Sweat, who proved to be a great addition last year. Maybe somebody like Zach Pickens or Gervin Dexter up front takes a big jump. TJ Edwards leads a pretty solid linebacking core. Tremaine Edmonds as well. He was up and down last year, but he's obviously a good player. And then the secondary should be quite good. Jalen Johnson was fantastic last year. Tyreek Stevenson, I think, is going to improve this year. I was quite high on him last year out of Miami. Jaquan Brisker is a good player. Kevin Byard's older, but he's still solid. So I think this defense could be pretty easily one of the top half of the league units. And their offense has a pretty high ceiling. So this team absolutely could be quite good. And if they finish top 2 in this division, I wouldn't be that surprised.
You ended with them, and I'm going to start with them because I think I'm on the opposite side with the Chicago Bears. I think everyone is taking this team, taking the Caleb Williams effect. They got Keenan Allen, they got Ramadunze, they got all these big pieces, and they're saying 9-10 wins. They're saying wild card spot. They're saying they're going to the playoffs. It's time that they're back. And I thought I was for a bit, but I decided that I'm not yet. I need to see it before I jump on the ship first. My main thing is that Caleb Williams is a rookie. We saw C.J. Stroud burst onto the scene last year and do what he does, and he was insane last year. But he also had one of the best offense coordinators while the Bears have the office coordinator, Shane Waldron, who we'll see how he does, but it's also his first year in Chicago. So we'll have to wait and see what he does, to wait and see how he acts. And it's going to be a little bit because he was with Seattle for a while, but we'll have to wait. And it's a question mark on if Caleb Williams is going to take that big step up. And I don't know if he's going to, because at USC, he was a very, not Hail Mary, but a hero ball, make the big plays, every play kind of player. And I don't know if they're going to be able to afford that. You have DJ Moore, you have Keenan Allen, you have Ramadunze. DJ Moore is definitely top 10 receiver. I think Keenan Allen's going to take probably a bit of a step back from last season into this season. It was probably his best year in the past 3-4 years, but he also had, I think, a better offense coordinator and also a better quarterback. He's also the number 2 guy as opposed to the number 1 guy. So I don't know if he's going to have nearly as big of a year as he did last year compared to this year on his first year in the Bears. And then with Ramadunze, he looks to be amazing, all that, but he's still a rookie, and I'm still hesitant to go, he's going to be amazing. I'm always hesitant with rookies in general because that's just how I am. I mean, we've seen guys get picked top 10 and be miserable, right? So I'm not jumping on the ship yet just because it's Caleb Williams, it's Ramadunze, it's Keenan Allen and all that. I want to give it a bit. Let me see some games, prove it to me that they want to be a playoff team, and then I'll jump on board. I'll jump on when they're good. Right now, I'm holding off. I think they won 7 or 8 games or so last year, and I think that's kind of where they could sit. I can see them winning 9, maybe even 10 games, but I do think the NFC is going to be a much better conference than it was last year, and we're going to have to see if that is even going to be good enough to get in, because I think guys like DeAndre Swift are not going to perform as well as they did last year, with a much worse offensive line in Chicago than it was last year. We have to see the jumps from Tevin Jenkins, Braxton Jones, Darnell Wright. Nate Davis was okay last year, so it's going to be big of a stretch for Caleb Williams, DeAndre Swift, Borshawn Johnson, Khalil Herbert with that offensive line. I think the defense is going to be the main selling point here. Is you get a really good defense. After the acquisition of Montez Sweat, the Bears had a top 10 defense, I believe, the second half of the year. Most of that was because of Montez Sweat and the secondary. Jalen Johnson was phenomenal last year. I think he's the top 3 corner in the league. Jaquan Brisker is one of the best young safeties in the league. Kevin Byard, he was in Philly. He was fine, but we'll see how he does with a better guy calling plays for the defense. Drake Stevenson, I think, could be a big step forward for the secondary. Kyler Gordon has played not too well since he got into the league, but he could step up. He's the nickel guy, so we'll see. I do think the secondary is going to be the strongest point. And you have 3 pretty good linebackers. C.J. Edwards, Philly legend. He's really good, really underrated. Tremaine Edmonds, one of those athletic linebackers in the league. And Jack Sanborn played pretty well last year as a second linebacker for whenever Edwards was hurt. You had Montez Sweat, who was ridiculous as a Bear last year. I think it is going to be a question on who is that other edge rusher. Is it Demarcus Walker? Do you see someone, one of the DTs, step up with Gervon Dexter? Maybe Zach Pickens steps up. But I do think there are a lot more question marks on this team than people are saying. And I'm hesitant to go out and say they're going to win 10 games, they're going to make the playoffs, because I think teams in this division are really good. Specifically, the Detroit Lions. You know, they just made the NFC Championship. They're the 2 seed. They're pretty good at football, right? Jared Goff, you know what you're going to get out of him. You're going to get just probably verge top 10 quarterback play. That's pretty good when you have one of the best running back duos in the league between David and Montgomery, who's going to be the pound, and Jahmyr Gibbs, who's going to be the round. Round and pound is I like to call it. You know, Gibbs on third down, who, if Montgomery gets hurt, can still take the ball and rock with it. But you can get big plays out of Gibbs. You can get the solid 5 yards of carry from Montgomery. And you need to throw it. Oh, okay. Well, here's first team All Pro Amon St. Brown. You have Jameson Williams for the 6-yard bombs. And you have Bam Bam Sam Laporta for the red zone threats. You have so much going on here for this Lions offense, and I think it could be pretty good. I think it was really good last year, and I think it's going to be maybe even better this year. You get a top 3 offensive line. I'm not going to say number 1. I'm an Eagles fan. Let's be hesitant here. But they're still ridiculous up front. Penei Sewell, I might have to admit, is better than Lane Johnson. It's him or Lane. I'm going to say 1A, 1B. I'm not going to admit it yet. But Taylor Decker, Glenn Glasnow, Frank Ragnow can now officially take the best center in the league crown. Cameron Zeitler, I also think, is a solid addition at right guard after they lost their old one. And the defense, I think, is going to be take a big step up. You had the weakness in the secondary, but you went out. You get Carlton Davis. You have Brian Branch, who's slotted to play safety, even though it would be nice to have him playing slot corner. We have Meek Robertson, who's going to be probably playing slot corner, or Ennis Rakestraw, who I think both of them could be serviceable at nickel. Terran Arnold, the first-round rookie, he's going to be on the other side of Carlton Davis, and I think he's going to be ridiculous. Brian Branch, again, Kirby Joseph are some of the best young safeties in the league. They're going to be really good at that spot. You got to see if you get the breakout from Jack Campbell, one of the most athletic linebackers we've seen in at least 10, 15 years. Derek Barnes, Alex Anzalone to try and see if they can solidify the middle of the field. Aiden Hutchinson to see if you can get that big breakout from him, to see if he can solidify himself as a top 10 edge rusher. To see if maybe Marcus Davenport, he was a former first-round pick, to see if he can do anything. Aleem McNeil, Aleem the Dream, to see if he can show he's a top 5 nose tackle, one of the best run stuffers in the league. Get that big breakout out of him, get a big payday after his buddy DJ Reader, one of the other best nose tackles, best run defenders in the league. No one is going to run on this Lions defense between Aleem and DJ Reader. And Aiden Hutchinson, who's also just really good at stopping the run. I think Anzalone's also really good at that. It's going to be a pain for teams to run in this defense. But I do think they might take a bit of a step back. I think they're going to have a bit of a harder schedule as compared to last year. Last year, they're playing a bit of a weaker schedule. I think it was a third-place schedule. Now they're going to play a first-place schedule. I think the division's going to be a lot better. You have the Packers, who are all in, trying to make the Super Bowl. I think the Vikings, who are definitely in rebuild mode, could still be dangerous. So Justin Jefferson, I think maybe they can do some stuff. Chicago Bears, again, they're trying to go out and win some games. So they're going to be fighting for everything. That's 3 teams in the division who aren't just pushovers, as opposed to last year with the Bears, bit of the Vikings, who are pushovers. You have to play the Niners, have to play the Cowboys, going to have to play, what's the other team? And the Buccaneers, who are going to be really good. You're going to have to play a lot of really good teams this year, and I think that might deplete their win total from last year to this year. And I think in a tough division, they might not be able to get first place in the division, specifically because of the Green Bay Packers. It's been a little bit, but my take on the Packers is I am all in on Jordan Love. I think he's going to be really good, not just for the Packers, but for the league. I think he's going to be ridiculous in the next coming years. Not like Mahomes level as he was coming out of college, but I do think he has sky-high potential. And I think he has a lot of weapons on the Packers offense to kind of help him out. Opposed to the Lions, I do think their offensive line is a little weaker. Elton Jenkins is really good, but it's going to be a question of if Zach Tom can step up. Rasheed Walker starting at left guard. Maybe you get the first round pick Jordan Morgan to come in. Andre Dillard was also a former first round pick. Maybe he gets a few starts, maybe even at right guard. Josh Myers has been a solid center for them. But a lot of question marks on the offensive line besides Jenkins, probably Zach Tom as well. So we'll see if they can step up to keep Jordan Love healthy. Because if he's healthy, this offense could be sky high. You have Josh Jacobs, who I do think is a bit overrated. I'm not the biggest fan of him. I don't think he's top 10 anymore. However, I think if you pair him, use him almost like a David Montgomery. If you bring in Marshawn Lloyd as almost a Jahmyr Gibbs type of role, or like a Tony Pollard type of role, I think this could be a really good run game. I think Lloyd's gonna be is a better pass catching back from this past draft, and I think getting him in the third round, I believe he went, is a really good get for the Packers after they lost. Uh, God, I have the depth chart up right in my face. After they lost Aaron Jones, that's his name. I got there. After lose Aaron Jones, thinking you're gonna get Josh Jacobs, Aaron Jones backfield. Packer fans don't get that, but I think Josh Jacobs and Marshawn Lloyd, I think in a few years that might be even better. I think Marshawn Lloyd's gonna be really good, and if they get him valuable snaps and give him some third down rolls, some catching drills, I think it'll be a phenomenal backfield. And I think the receiver core, a lot of these guys, none of them is a standout. I'm the number one. I'm the best. But I think we're gonna have to see if anyone can step up or if they continue to do almost like a committee type of role. Christian Watson, I think, has that potential, but he's getting hurt. And I think he can kind of stay as a wide receiver 2 type of role and be a really good option there for Jordan Love. Romeo Dubs showed up in the playoffs against the Cowboys and against the Niners. He was easily the best receiver in the playoffs. He could step up. Jaden Reed as a slot receiver, he's shown that he can step up. And you mentioned Dontavion Wicks. I think he also has the ability to show up and be one of those guys. Luke Musgrave, a tight end, the third round pick last year. I think all these guys, some day 2 picks, I think all of them could show up and actually be really good. This entire team is just a bunch of day 2 picks between Lloyd, Watson, Wicks, Dubs, Reed, Musgrave. I think all of them could show up and be some valuable assets for this team. And I think they don't need that big time elite receiver. They just need guys to get open, and Jordan Love will make plays for them. As for the defense, I think they're going to take a bit of a step forward. I think you get Rashawn Gary fully healthy this year. I think you get Kenny Clark. I think Preston Smith is still solid, but maybe you get the breakout from Lucas Van Ness. It's kind of what they've been hoping for, is to get another edge rusher next to Rashawn Gary. I think they want to see one of these linebackers break out. Does Quay Walker take the big step, or do you get Adrian Cooper as the rookie to come in and show off that he knows what he's doing? Does Jair Alexander get to stay healthy and show that he's still a top 10 corner in the league? Does Eric Stokes, the former first rounder, show up and break out? You have David McKinney, the big free agent signing from the Giants. I think that's a big get. They've been at a weakness at safety for a few years. I think McKinney's going to help solidify that. And I think as well, Javon Bullard, you had a mock where he went round 1. I had him as my number 2 safety. They get him, I think, round 3. I think they got Javon Bullard. And I think him and McKinney's going to be a nasty safety duo alongside Jair at corner. You get the good young linebackers, and you hopefully get a breakout on the D-line, either Devontae White or Lucas Van Ness, where this defense shows up and plays like a top 10, top 15 unit. And that's all they need, as long as that offense can show they are the top 10 unit that they can be. If Jordan Love shows that he is a top 10 quarterback, I think this team's ceiling is sky high. I think they can go as far as Jordan Love takes them. Because I think they get to the NFC Championship. They beat the Niners. If Jordan Love doesn't make a questionable pass, I think there's a world where the Packers are in the Super Bowl last year. There's a world out there where they make it. I don't know if they win it. I don't think they beat the Lions. Well, there's a world where they make it. Hell, even win it. They don't. They're not going to beat the Chiefs. But you get my point. And last team, Minnesota Vikings, they're definitely the favorite to finish last. But I do think out of the quote-unquote last place teams, I think they have a bit more of a ceiling, per se. I think this offense could be ridiculous. If J.J. McCarthy comes out, shows he has those raw materials, and those raw materials solidify themselves and actually show that they're true and not just attributes, I think this offense could be top 5 right off the bat. I think they finally got a run game with Aaron Jones, and that was their biggest weakness last year. If they had a healthy Kirk and a run game, they win 10-plus games, to me. I think we're going to see if JJ can develop. I don't think they shouldn't rush him. If they're okay with it, start Donald. Don't force JJ to come in. Let him develop. Let him wait. Start him a couple weeks into the season. Let him show off what he can do. Let Aaron Jones handle the ball for him. You have Justin Jefferson, but you don't have to force feed him the ball because Jordan Addison is damn good. Hopefully will at some point get TJ Hawkinson back. He got hurt last year. Well, I don't know if he'll have the week 1, but I think he'll be back sooner rather than later. And the offensive line's also pretty good. You have the tackles lined up with Darisaw, Brian O'Neill. Garrett Bradbury is a pretty good center. Dalton Risner, I think, is solid at guard. Ed Ingram at the right guard. Where I think the guards are a bit questionable, but the center and tackles are really good. I think the weapons are really good for Jefferson, Addison, Jones, Hawkinson. You have Brandon Powell as your third receiver. Maybe you see someone like Trent Sherfield step up, I think if you get JJ to show these tools of his, he actually knows how to use these tools, I think they could be a lot better than people think. I don't think they're going to win 4 games. I think they're going to win more than that. I think they sit probably 7 or 8 wins, kind of where I was saying with the Bears. I think it's just a matter of which rookie QB wants to break out first. And it'll probably be Caleb because he's going to start week 1. But I do think J.J. McCarthy has one of the better situations to come in and actually play well and not just become I'm on a bad team syndrome, Like Drake May is on the Patriots. He has no one to throw to. Well, you have JJ. He gets to throw to Justin Jefferson as a career, which is always fun. But the biggest question mark is going to be the defense. You have Jonathan Grenard. You have Jonathan Bullard, I guess, next to him. I think Andrew Van Ginkel, I think, is a guy who could come in and be solid. But I think Grenard, Van Ginkel, and Dallas Turner, those are 3 really good edge rushers, and I think they're going to have fun using all 3 of them on the defense. I think seeing Dallas Turner and Grenard come at you on the left and right-hand side is a lot to worry about if you're an opposing quarterback in the offensive line. But I think the main threat to the Vikings is the secondary. You'd like to see Cam Bynum or maybe Byron Murphy kind of step up. Byron Murphy, former second-round pick. We'll see if Harrison Smith has something in the tank. They signed Shaquille Griffin, who isn't what he used to be, but he could still be solid. We can see if Caleb Evans wants to come out and show he can do something. We'll see if Lewis Senior wants to come out and do something. Maybe Kai Blackman. A lot of young guys, Josh Metellus as well. A lot of young guys to see if they can come in and try to break out. Maybe get one guy to break out, show he's really good. But I think you would need a few more. You mentioned Blake Cashman. I think him and Ivan Pace are a really good linebacker duo. I think you have those two, Grenard, Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner, all of these guys coming at you on the outside. You're going to have a lot of edge presence here. The defensive tackles is a bit of a question. Maybe you get a Jacqueline Roy guy to come in and step up. But I do think the defense is going to be the weakness point. But I think if you get JJ to break out sooner rather than later, this offense could be really good.
Okay, so with that, we will give our predictions. My order for now, I think it's going to be Lions, Packers, Bears, Vikings. I'm very tempted to switch 2 and 3, but I don't think I quite had the guts to do it for now. So I think that's what we're going to roll with. But again, certainly subject to change.
I'm going to go in probably not a way that you're going to like. I'm going to say the Packers are going to win the division here, get ahead of the Lions, show that they still run the North. I'm going to the Lions get in the 2 seed. And then I'm going to go a bit bold. I'm going to say the Vikings get 3rd and the Bears get 4th. I think the Bears fans are going to have to live in misery still. And I think Vikings fans get to rejoice that the rebuild doesn't take as long.
Can't say I'd be too upset with the Bears fans still being depressed. All right, let's move on to the MLB All-Star break. We'll highlight the trade deadline a little bit and go over some stuff for the second half of the year. So now let's talk about the MLB season. We have pretty much made it to the All-Star break with around a week to go here until we get to the All-Star festivities. The All-Star rosters are out. The Home Run Derby finalists are being announced. So let's sort of talk about where we are in the MLB season. Now that we're halfway through, we're really starting to see some teams really step up and show that they are the crop of the league, and other teams have fallen off quite a bit. So I guess I'll start with where I think the top teams currently lie, because I think there's a clear group of like 4 or 5 top tier contenders and then a group behind them. So I think in the first tier of contenders in the National League, it's pretty comfortably the Phillies and the Dodgers. I think the Braves are the clear third team, but I think they definitely are a tier behind those two. And then in the American League, I think the Orioles and the Yankees are the 2 teams to beat. But given how well that the Houston Astros have played since their disastrous start, I kind of think that they're the third best team long-term in this conference, and Cleveland and Seattle and Minnesota are sort of secondary contenders, but certainly could make some noise in the playoffs. In terms of teams that have fallen off quite a bit, the Kansas City Royals they have not been as good as they were earlier in the year. I felt like people really overrated the Royals coming into the season, and for a while it looked like I was wrong. But now they're finally starting to prove me right as being the third best team in that division. So it seems like their hot start was a little bit fluky. I still wouldn't be surprised if they buy at the trade deadline, because they're still in position to certainly have a chance to get a wild card spot. I believe they're currently the third team in there with... Actually, no, they're the first team out. So they're not in the playoffs right now with how well Boston has played. But I could certainly still see the Royals look to buy, add some more pieces to the lineup. But they've certainly fallen off quite a bit. In terms of other teams who I think could make some big moves at the deadline, good or bad, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Padres make another splash.
I know you're talking, but you keep cutting in and out for me, and it's difficult. I don't know what's happening.
That's odd. In terms of other teams that I think could make big moves, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Padres make another splash. I could see them continuing to be aggressive in their sort of, I don't care, let's just add more big pieces mindset. So I think they're going to be a team who isn't necessarily a surprise buyer, but certainly a big-time buyer. Boston has a loaded farm system as well, and again, they've been quietly pretty good as of recent. I could see them making a splash, maybe not partying with one of their top-of-the-line prospects, but with them currently being barely in the wild card, I think they could look to make a push to really position themselves to get possibly a 4 or a 5 seed. I think in terms of sellers, Toronto is certainly one of the obvious ones, one or both of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. or Bo Bichette. And I think that probably is the right move for Toronto, assuming you can get adequate value. I think this core has kind of run its course with the Blue Jays, and they kind of just need to restart. The rest of the roster is lacking. It's older. I think it would be in their best interest to move on. The Tigers are an interesting one as well, specifically in the case of Tariq Skubal, because he's been probably the best pitcher in baseball this year. He's not the type of guy you want to trade away, but you can get a whole lot for him. And especially considering how pitchers have become more varied in terms of performance, largely because of injury, it might not be the worst idea to sell him while his value is high. You need to get like a Godfather package, I feel like, to even consider it. But if you do, from a team like Baltimore or something, I think it would be worth the consideration. The Rangers are a team who have been linked to selling. I don't think they quite should yet. They've shown that they can win the World Series. They just did it last year. The pitching staff is getting healthier. So I don't think they should be in as much of a rush to sell. I wouldn't be surprised if they do, though. Arizona is another weird one. They're kind of in the mix for a wild card spot, kind of not. The NL wild card race is really weird. I think the Braves are certainly going to get one of those spots. But then after that, there's like 7 or 8 teams who are all in the mix. So I could certainly see a mix of them buying, a mix of them selling. Between St. Louis and even going down to the Cubs, that's a group of like 9 teams separated by around 6 games. Outside of the Marlins and the Rockies, every team in the NL is still in it to an extent and has a reason to buy. I think Pittsburgh's another one to watch in particular. They're 4 games out of the last wild card spot, but their young talent's really coming together. Paul Skeens is an animal. Brian Reynolds is playing really well. O'Neal Cruz has shown a lot of good things this year. I could see the Pirates being a surprising team who looks to be really aggressive and buys during the trade deadline as opposed to selling. I would love to see them be aggressive and make a push for the playoffs, and then I can do victory laps once we get to October saying that I was right about them.
Yeah, you might be right about the Pirates, but I'm going to sit on the Reds. I think the entire NL Central is definitely a weirder division. I said the Brewers are going to finish last in the division, and, well, I was a little wrong about that one. But I think because it's baseball and because it's the NL Central, I think there's a world where this division could be mirrored by the end of the year, and it would still happen. But I do think the Cubs have been linked to selling, barring a big renaissance from them. We could see guys like Cody Bellinger out the door, but I do think all these teams could just kind of retool and kind of resettle. I think the Cardinals have been on more of a hot streak recently, catching up to the Brewers. I think they go out and could buy to get maybe another pitcher because besides Sonny Gray, they have no one good. We mentioned the Pirates. I think they could go out, get another bat or maybe even another pitcher to help out their younger core with O'Neal Cruz, Paul Skeens, Ryan Reynolds, all those guys. I think the Reds could also just come out and buy. Hunter Green, I mentioned when we did our predictions that he was going to be ridiculous, and he has been. He's had a sub-4 ERA getting in the threes. We've seen Ellie De La Cruz break out. He got an all-star nod. I think their younger core isn't hitting as well as it could, but I think we've seen Nick Lodolo played well. We've seen a large part of that young core, of the pitching core, play well. I think they could either go get another more veteran bat or just get a more surefire pitcher to get into the rotation. And I think they could come out. They're only 5 games under 500, but they're only half a game back behind the Pirates. So they're only, 5 games outside of a wild card spot. They could definitely get on a hot streak like they did last year. Almost got a wild card spot last year. And if they get on that hot streak, if Ellie De La Cruz wants to come out, Hunter Green wants to come out, they could definitely come in and snag one of those last wild card spots. Because as you mentioned, this NL is really weird. Besides the teams at the top with the Phillies, the Braves, the Dodgers, and as of right now, the Brewers, all the other teams are just kind of fighting for the last 2 spots. The Mets are under 500. The Nationals have that really young core. And there's a world where they might buy, maybe get a veteran here or there to kind of solidify their rotation. And they might go out and try and get a spot. You might see a team, you mentioned the Padres, to go out and buy, get big. We could see the Diamondbacks want to get more veterans, another pitcher after the Jordan Montgomery fiasco. Similarly, the Giants had the Blake Snell fiasco, so maybe they want to jump ship with those contracts, those players, maybe get some more bats for the team. And I think besides a certain team in the American League, I think the Marlins are going to probably be the biggest sellers at the deadline. I've seen things where they're not going to sell guys like Jesus Sanchez, Ryan De La Cruz, or Jesus Luzardo, Marlins legends. But I think as of recently, as of about a day or 2 ago, lots of rumors of Jazz Chisholm leaving Miami, and I do think it'll happen. I do think Jazz is one of the more overrated players in baseball. I think he won the poll for most overrated player. He hasn't played all that well as of not just this season, but in general. Stat-wise, he's fine. He's in 255, 700 OPS. It's alright. But if he gets on a good team, he could be second baseman, even if you want to play him a second, or to put him in the outfield where he kind of has been for Miami. Let him decent piece for a rotation, be like that 7-8 hitter, and he can do some stuff for you. I don't know where he would go. I was kind of looking around trying to see where Jazz Chisholm specifically would go. I could see a world where he goes to the Padres because they love their infielders. I could see a world where he goes to the Guardians to solidify their outfield, or the Mariners who might want another bat. But we'll have to wait and see kind of where the NL leads. And the AL, I think, might end up being more cut and dry almost. I think AL East, you have the Orioles and the Yankees up at the top. I think the Red Sox, who are not too far behind wild card wise. I think they could go out and buy. You've seen guys like Tristan Casas come out and play really well. I think they'll get Marcelo Mayer to come out to the big league soon. I think guys like Tyler O'Neill, who's played really well, he got an All-Star nod, I believe. I think the Red Sox come out and buy, get another bat or a pitcher and their rotation has been ridiculous this year. They could come out and play really well. And then the Rays and the Blue Jays, I think they're probably going to end up selling. We've heard rumors about Randy Rosarena, Brandon Lau, Zach Elfin on the Rays as well. Lots of guys who could be out the door. The Blue Jays, I think they've said they're going to keep Vladdy and Bo Bichette. We've also heard Bo Bichette say he wouldn't be surprised if he was traded. So if I were them, I think it'd be time to jump ship. It hasn't worked in the past couple years. You're in a too tough division with two of the top 5 teams in baseball. The Red Sox barely even went through a rebuild and they're already playing good. The Rays always find a way to be good. So at this point, I think the best bet would be to sell, would be ship Bo Bichette for prospects. Send him to, you could send him to Cleveland for all I care. You could get a lot of assets for Vladdy, because I think he's really good. And I think a team like the Mariners could go out and get probably either one of them. Because I think the Mariners just need bats. And I think if you get a guy like Vladdy on the Mariners, that's pretty good. It's pretty fun. And then the AL Central, this division, like 2 months into baseball, was really weird. And I think it's still weird. The White Sox suck. They're that aforementioned AL team. They're going to sell everybody. We're going to see Tommy Pham probably get shipped off for a few prospects. We're going to see, I think Luis Robert is going to finally get dealt. I don't know where. It could be to Philly, which I wouldn't mind. But I don't think it's going to be for a haul or anything because he hasn't played all that great this year. He's more of a hot streak recently, which is good for them selling him. But I do think he's been on a bit iffy. We've seen him not have the greatest plays in the world before. But I don't think he's going to go for a big haul, especially because of his injury history. The Tigers kind of sat around 500 basically all year. And it's kind of a matter of time as to when are they going to break out or are they going to sell, you know? So we'll see how that goes. The Royals are playing great baseball. They're still above 500, but they kind of come back down to earth. They're barely sitting above 500. We saw Seth Lugo get an All-Star nod. We saw Salvi get an All-Star nod. So that's really good for them. The Twins, after starting off pretty slow, they've really picked it up. They're just behind the Guardians here. They're second in the division. And the Guardians, they had Shane Bieber have 3 starts, and he played amazing, and then he got Tommy John. And yet they're still number 1 in the league, where you've seen Steven Kwan hit just shy of 400. Jose Ramirez is ridiculous. Emmanuel Clase is the best closer in baseball, and I don't think it's close. So the Guardians are going to probably try and keep going with what they're doing right now, and we're going to see if they can kind of hold tight and keep the Twins at bay. The AL West is just kind of shambles as well. The A's and the Angels sucked. We all knew that going into the year. It was a matter of Mariners, Astros, Rangers. I don't think anybody would have predicted this, that the Astros would have started off really bad the first month and a half. They picked it back up, but they're kind of sitting at 500. The pitching hasn't been what it used to be, but Jordan, Kyle Tucker, Jose Altuve, they're all still pretty good. The Rangers, real slow. The World Series hangover. Their hitters aren't hitting. Pitchers aren't pitching. It's not good for the Rangers right now. Maybe they could pick it up, but they've been talked about maybe selling guys like Max Scherzer, maybe Leonardo Taveras. Lots of guys they might sell off, try to help out the farm system. And then the Mariners are first in the division, but it feels like they shouldn't be. I think in every division, they wouldn't be leading it. Yeah, they would be not first in every other division besides the AL West. And it's only because of the pitching. Their pitching is really good. I think I mentioned this when we did our predictions. I said they have probably about 2 or 3 different Cy Young contenders. I might have been a bit hasty on that one, but you have Luis Castillo, you have Logan Gilbert, Matt Brash I think is in the bullpen, but he's ridiculous. Brian Wu is amazing. Oh my lord, this pitching staff of the Mariners, it makes me understand why I love baseball. That's literally how this Mariners pitching staff makes me feel. And then their hitting makes me understand why I hate baseball and why I hate playing baseball. Because God, they can't get a hit for their lives. I think they are bottom 3 for either batting average or OPS or something like that. They are abysmal at the plate. It's ridiculous. That's why I mentioned guys like Vladdy, guys like Bo Bichette, maybe Jazz Chisholm, because, man, they cannot hit for anything. And you think, oh, they have Julio Rodriguez. No, he's pretty good. He hasn't played good either. 247. He has 8 home runs. His 2 years, not this year. He's been awful this year. It is ridiculous that how bad this hitting staff of the Mariners is, and it makes me upset because they could be the best team in the league if they had bat, and they don't. You know who has bats? The Phillies. I'm not talking about the Phillies, but I just want to mention the ones.
Okay, let's move over to the NBA now. The NBA playoffs and finals have wrapped up. We have made it into the offseason. So we'll start quickly with the conclusion of the playoffs. There's really not a whole lot to go over here. Since the beginning of the year, I expected the Celtics to run the table, and they ran the table. I think every single one of their series in the playoffs lasted 5 games, except for Indiana, which I'm pretty sure they swept. They lost 3 games the entire way, and it was always a matter of when they were going to do it. Ultimately, they got the job done. I think the more interesting thing about these playoffs, rather than the games itself, was sort of how the media has portrayed this Celtics run, because I think a lot of it is pretty unfair. For one thing, I don't think the Celtics are a super team. I think in order to be a super team, you have to be fully star-driven, such as those late 2010s Golden State Warriors teams. Once they added Kevin Durant, they had 4, maybe 5 All-Stars at a time. That's not the case with Boston. They've got 2 stars and a bunch of really, really good A-plus tier role players around them. I think it's a really fundamentally sound team, and I think that type of structure is probably a lot more sustainable as opposed to, say, a super team, especially if you're able to keep everybody, which it looks like Boston's going to be able to. They've extended Jason Tatum, Drew Holiday, and Derek White this offseason. They extended Jaylen Brown last offseason. Kristaps Porzingis is the only guy who's not under contract long-term, and he's also had injury stuff throughout his career. So I think if there was one of their 5 to be expendable, he's the one. And if they do re-sign him or replace him, regardless, I think they should be fine. I think this team's going to be really good for a while, and I don't think this is the last championship we'll see with this Celtics core. But overall, the playoffs, it wasn't the most climactic. The conference finals lasted 4 and 5 games. The NBA finals lasted 5 games. We had some fun early round series. Nuggets, Wolves, Sixers, Knicks. But overall, an unexciting playoff. Hopefully next year's we have more drama on the floor, per se.
I think playoffs-wise, I think you and me are kind of in the same situation that it was most likely going to be Nuggets, Celtics. That's at least what I had said. And I think I was picking the Nuggets, and as soon as the Nuggets got knocked out by the T-Wolves, I think it was foregone conclusion that I thought the Celtics were going to win it. I kept picking the Mavs to win it, though, because I just didn't want to see the Celtics win. I don't think anyone did. But I do think it was kind of clear that they were easily the favorites, not just in the East, but they are probably the favorites for the entire NBA. They just have probably the most complete roster. But I do agree. I do think their run has been more inflated to think, oh, it's not a good run or whatever. They don't control who they play. It was the same thing with the 2022 Eagles. You know, I had to deal with all that. We played the Giants, and then Brock Purdy got hurt in his championship. And then we played a real team, and we lost or whatever. I don't care. So I've been there with the Celtics. I've been there we played who we played, and they won. They destroyed every team that they played. They got rid of the Heat really easily. I know Jimmy Butler was gone, but they got rid of him. And then they had to get rid of the Pacers, you know? And I think they handled them pretty swiftly, and they handled the Mavericks. You know, Luka was dominating for the entire playoffs, and all the role players were playing their best basketball they had all year. They made it to the finals, and the Celtics just shut them down. And they want to call it a bad run, but they faced the Mavericks team they were the 5 seed, but they were one of the best 5 seeds, and they were destroying everyone. They destroyed the the all-prime defense T-Wolves. They knocked off the first seed Thunder, and the Celtics destroyed them. It wasn't even close. They won Game 4, but doesn't matter because they were going to win Game 5 or Game 6 anyways. I don't think it's a question of to what the Celtics were. I think it's they were the most complete team in the league. I think they had the best regular season, and it makes sense that they won. And it's not that much of they had a easy route. It's just that's who they played. The East just wasn't as good last year.
Let's now take a look at the NBA offseason. We'll start with the draft. Obviously, there's this conception around this draft class that it isn't very good. And I don't entirely agree. I think the top of this class certainly lacks clear high-end talent. I think the star power in this draft, though, is going to be more spread out. Kind of like the 2013 draft, which was looked at as a bad class at the time. It's turned out to be a fairly solid one. It's just that not all the star players were at the top. I'll go over some of the picks I liked and the picks that I didn't like. I thought the Wizards had a really intriguing draft. I was surprised if they traded Denny Avdija to Portland, but Alex Sarr I thought was the best prospect in the draft. Bob Carrington's a fun player, and then Keyshawn George at 24 I think could end up being one of the steals of the first round. I think he's a guy with a lot of upside. Ron Holland to Detroit was one of my favorite picks as well. Holland was pretty low on consensus boards in like the teens, but I had him second. I think he's going to be really good. I've been banging the drum that he is the best prospect with the G League Ignite program over Matas Buzelis, and I think it's a pretty wide margin between the two. I'm a lot higher on Holland than consensus. I'm a lot lower on Buzelis, so I think the Pistons picking Holland over Buzelis, Cody Williams, and some of the other guys in that range will ultimately be the right pick, even if it's an awkward fit at first. I think his upside is too much to pass up. I think a lot of these older players are going to be better than people think. Devin Carter from Providence going to the Kings. I think he's going to be really good. He's a talented combo guard. He's a little bit smaller, but he can play on and off the ball. Really good rebounder. He can shoot the ball. He's a good defender, and I think he's going to fit quite nicely in Sacramento. Dalton Connect with the Lakers at 17. Everybody talks about the floor with him. He's going to be able to get early minutes. He can shoot the ball, which is all true. But I think the ceiling with him is higher than people think. I think he can create his own shot at a high level. I think he can handle the ball. He's athletic. He's a good finisher. I could see Connect ceiling being a lot higher than people expect. As for some of the picks that I didn't like, I don't think Atlanta made the right move at number 1 with Zachary Rizache from France. I think the floor with him is a little bit lower than people think, and the ceiling for me really isn't there. I don't see much as someone who can be an initiator or a creator on offense. At best, I think he can be a spot-up shooter who can play off the ball. I just don't really see it with him. I don't think he's an awful prospect, but I think he was more of a late lottery guy. Tijan Salon at 6 to the Hornets, another pick that I don't really like. A lot of people are talking about him as this high upside swing for the Hornets. I don't really see it that way. I think he has a low floor, but I also don't think his ceiling is that good. He's got a long ways to go. He's not efficient as a scorer. He's questionable defensively. The shooting mechanics are pretty solid, but I don't really think there's a whole lot of on-ball versatility. I think best case, he's someone who can be a role player for you on offense, which if you're taking a swing on upside at 6, I just don't really think he has the upside profile to back it up, per se. And I don't know if he's a guy I would have picked in the first round at all. I just don't really see it with him. I'm intrigued by Zach Edey with Memphis. I think 9 was definitely rich, but I think he's going to be a guy who contributes early on. He looked pretty good in his first Summer League game last night. I don't think he's going to be as effective as he was in college because I think his lack of athleticism will be kind of an issue, but he's still going to be the biggest guy on the floor, and that's still going to be very helpful for him offensively. But on defense, I do have some questions with his rim protection, and his mobility and his versatility certainly isn't there. So I do wonder about that. And then obviously the big story in the second round was Bronny James. Everybody's calling it a Nepo pick, which on one hand I get it, but on the other hand I don't think it's entirely fair. It's not like Bronny James is an awful prospect per se. He was a 5-star coming out of high school. He had the heart issue. Sure, he wasn't that good in USC as a freshman, and he probably should have stayed in school, but he's still an NBA-level prospect. Not to say that he's going to become a good player or anything, but I certainly think there's a chance, whether it's with the Lakers or with someone else. But I don't think he's, like, completely awful. I think he's probably going to have a better career than a lot of the players drafted in the second round, especially if he can hit his ceiling. So I don't hate the pick at all, per se. And I think the nepotism thing is a little bit unfair because there's nepotism around the entire league. Someone who follows the Pistons like myself, the amount of nepotism with that team is significantly more than the Lakers picking Bronny James. So that's sort of my thought there. I don't feel overly confident that he's going to become a great player, but I definitely think it's possible. And then in terms of free agency, obviously the big one is Paul George going to the Sixers. As a Paul George fan, I hope it works out. I'm not really sure if it will, though. I think it would have been in the Sixers' best interest to get really good role players. I think they should have been all over a guy like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who ended up going to Orlando. Kind of like what we talked about with the Celtics. They have 2 stars and then an A-tier group of role players. The Denver Nuggets last year, 2 stars, Jokic and Murray, and an A-tier group of role players with guys like Aaron Gordon, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I think that would have been the best course of action for the Sixers because they do have the star power to get it done with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. It's just about, obviously, Embiid performing in the playoffs. But if he does, if this team has good role players, they can easily be one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. And I think that gives them a clearer avenue to winning a championship than signing Paul George. But what I will say is I think they have done a good job adding role players since getting Paul George. They re-signed Kelly Oubre to a team-friendly deal. They signed Caleb Martin to a team-friendly deal. So I will say I think they've done a good job of corresponding moves. And I think in terms of high-end talent, the Sixers certainly do have it. It's just a matter of health and playoff performance. This isn't a team I'm going to bet on, but I think it is possible that they make a big run, say to the Eastern Conference Finals. I have a hard time thinking they get past Boston. But if they end up being the second best team in the Eastern Conference next year, I really would not be that surprised. DeMar DeRozan going to Sacramento is interesting. I don't really know if it moves the needle a ton for the Kings, but I like that they're trying to make a big splash and change things up because as their core currently is, they have a good team, but not a great team. I wouldn't be surprised to see them make another move. I don't think they're going to get a guy like Brandon Ingram. They have been linked to him. But I think maybe getting one more piece, and this team could be a top 5 seed in the West. Keegan Murray's a player who I think is really going to break out next year. So if they can add that one final piece, not to say they're going to be like a top-tier team in the West, but I think they could be really good. Klay Thompson to Dallas is interesting. He passed up on more money to go to the Lakers and possibly stay with the Warriors. I think Dallas is a pretty good fit, even though Klay has clearly gotten worse. But I think it's a pretty good spot for him. I also really like Najee Marshall with the Mavericks. I think he's a pretty underrated role player coming from the New Orleans Pelicans. And then there was another move that I want to talk about that has completely slipped my mind. We'll see if I remember it within the next couple of minutes. But overall, I don't think there were any crazy moves other than Paul George and maybe DeMar DeRozan that completely shift the landscape of the league. But certainly some interesting roster moves. Oh, I remember the move now. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope to Orlando. I thought that was the best contract of free agency. I thought that was a great move for Orlando. The Magic have done a tremendous job building around their young core. Certainly could see them being a top 4 seed next year if one of Paolo or Franz Wagner takes another jump up.
Yeah, so I'm not going to touch on the draft too much because I'm not the biggest NBA draft guy. I hear the narrative that it's weak, there's nothing to do, but I do think there are good players. I think Alex Sarr is a good addition for the young core that the Wizards are slowly building, and I think they're going to go out and try and get maybe a Cooper Flag next year, but I doubt they're going to let Cooper Flag go to the Wizards of all teams, will say, I do really like the Zach Edey pick. I think 9 is a bit rich, but I think it is a team to take a bit of a reach on him. I think the Grizzlies is a really good fit for him. He just played his Summer League debut the other day. I think he had 13 points. He had 10 rebounds, 2 blocks or something like that. He played great. And I think him next to Triple J, I think is going to be a really good front court. I think the Grizzlies getting John Morant back might be the biggest thing besides Paul George. I think the Grizzlies are going to be really good. They were the 2 seed last year with healthy Ja. And I think they get Ja. They just got Gigi, who's really good. Now you get Zach Edey to kind of be not the starting center, but maybe in a few years he'll be the guy who's going to maybe even be the future center of the team. I do think the Grizzlies could be a team who kind of comes up and shows, hey, we're still here. We just needed a year. as for agency, you already touched on the Paul George signing. I'm gonna touch on it more, because I'm the Sixers fan, so I'm gonna say how I feel, and I feel pretty damn good that Paul George is a Philadelphia Sixer. I was kind of in the same boat though, that I kind of wanted more of a Caldwell Pope, maybe even get a DeRozan and get a much better bench unit, and just get a much more better role players type of thing. But if we can still get a solid bench around these big three, I think after last year, the Sixers finished at the 7th seed, and we're only a few games back of the 2 seed, not the 6 seed, the 2 seed. I think they were like 4 or 5 games back of the Knicks at the 2 seed. If we had healthy Joel Embiid last year, we're the 2 seed, and I don't think it's close. I think Joel Embiid stays healthy, we get the 2 seed, and now we probably still choke in the playoffs, but regardless, we'd still probably end as the 2 seed. Now, if Joel Embiid and Paul George want to stay healthy, and we get Paul George, we almost are definitely going to be the 2 seed, and I think there's a world where maybe the Celtics get a little hurt, maybe they have a bit of a hangover. There's a world where the Sixers get the 1 seed, you know? But playoff Embiid exists, so I don't think they're going to go crazy far playoff-wise. Realistically, though, I do think this is a big needle for not just the Sixers, but for the East as well. I think you have the big teams with the Celtics, Knicks, Bucks, and Sixers. I think those are the big 4. I think we'll have to wait and see what the Cavs do. See, does Darius Garland leave? Does he go to, I was saying the Pelicans for a while, and then they got DeJounte Murray. So, and then I'd say the Spurs, but they got Chris Paul. So I don't even know where Darius Garland's going to go. Does he stay in Cleveland? Do the Magic take that next big step up? Do we see the Hawks try and continue what they have going now that they got the first pick? Might not have made a good pick with it, but it still had the first pick. James Harden stayed with the Clippers. I do like that. Caldwell Pope to Orlando, I think, is, like you mentioned, one of the best signings here. I think the Magic have already one of the best younger cores in basketball, and now they get one of the best role players in the league in Caldwell Pope, and I think him alongside Franz, Paolo, Jalen Suggs, I think that group could very well come up, be a top, probably be that 5th team outside that top 4, be ahead of the Cavs, maybe even get ahead of maybe if the Bucks fall off a bit again next year. We'll have to wait and see. But I do think the Magic have that opportunity to go out and be a really good young team. I don't think they're going to be like the Thunder or anything, but I do think they'll be really good. I think Clay to the Mavs, I think, is probably the next biggest move we saw in free agency. And I do like maybe the role as just like a catch and shoot 3 kind of player. You have Kyrie and Luka as playmakers, and just have Clay kind of sit on the outside, shoot 3s, call it a day. But I do think if they're able to go out and get a good center, like maybe a Jared Allen from the Cavs, I think they could round out the roster a lot more. And I think they could show, hey, we want to be here. We want to go back and be not just the 5th seed, be a top 3 seed, you know?
All right, so with that, we will move over to our fun and game segment. We're going to do something a little bit different today, and I think you guys are probably going to enjoy it. So what we're going to be doing today here for the fun and game segment is that we will be making Mount Rushmores for certain teams. 3 NFL teams, 3 NBA teams, 3 MLB teams, with the idea of picking 4 players who we feel like were the best for that franchise or represent them the most, or the 4 players who we feel like deserve to really be the all-time faces of one of those teams. We'll start with the NFL. The 3 teams we'll be doing are the Falcons, the Seahawks, and the Raiders. So I'll go first. I'll open up with Atlanta. In no order, I went with Deion Jones. No, definitely not Deion Jones. Deion Sanders, Julio Jones, Michael Vick, and Matt Ryan. I think the 2 quarterbacks are probably the most debatable ones, but Matt Ryan won an MVP here. He was a good starter for almost 15 years. And then Michael Vick, yeah, things ended poorly, but when you think Dirty Birds, Atlanta Falcons, you think of prime Michael Vick. So I feel like him being one of the faces of that team, he kind of belongs there. For the Seahawks, I feel like there were 3 pretty easy choices: Russell Wilson, Steve Largent, and Walter Jones. For the last spot, I wanted to go with somebody from the Legion of Boom defense, and ultimately I leaned towards Richard Sherman, the big trash talker, shutdown corner, but I can easily make a case for Bobby Wagner, Earl Thomas, even Cam Chancellor. And then for the Raiders, we're mostly going back, mostly because the Raiders have had like nothing good since 2000. So I went with Marcus Allen, Jim Upshaw, Tim Brown, and Jim Plunkett. Plunkett was probably the weird one because statistically he wasn't like some all-time great player, but he was starting quarterback for 2 Super Bowls. So for that, I felt like he deserved the final spot.
Mine for the Falcons is Julio Jones, Matt Ryan. I think those are the 3 easy ones. But I'm going to not go with Vic. I'm going to go with Roddy White. He was there with Atlanta for about a decade, made 4 Pro Bowls, a first-team All-Pro in 2010. He ended up leaving or retiring right before they made their Super Bowl in 2016, which is a little unfortunate for him. But I do think Roddy White's pretty good, and I think Vic might not have been there for the longest time. I did kind of think about guys like Jesse Tuggle, like a big edge rusher down there, but no one really knows who Jesse Tuggle is, so I'm not going to count him. As for the Seahawks, I went with 2 easy ones, Walter Jones and Steve Largent, and then I had to think for a bit. Do I go with Shawn Alexander, the big running back, won an MVP there? Do I go with one of the Legion of Boom guys, with Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas? I could go Steve Hutchinson, the big Hall of Fame guard. And what I landed on probably the best quarterback of the Seahawks ever in Russell Wilson, mainly because he brought them their first Super Bowl, and he brought them to 2 of them, let alone just not winning one. And he was there for about a decade or so, probably a little shy of it, but I think the impact of him bringing that first Super Bowl to Seattle is big enough. Part of me wants to go with Legion of Boom guy, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, and that part of me is going to come out. I'm going to go Cam Chancellor. I have maybe it's the me talking with Cam Chancellor, but I think Cam Chancellor personifies the Legion of Boom. I think Richard Sherman was the talker, the out there guy. You see him on screen most of the time, but I think every time you saw what personified the Legion of Boom, you saw Cam Chancellor. Cam Chancellor was that guy, and he would have played many more years if he didn't get hurt. And I think he's going to be I think he might join the coaching staff of the Seahawks, be maybe a DB's coach, and be a big part of that organization going forward. And then as for the Raiders, I do think there's a lot of answers here. I do think it's all going to be older players who aren't playing anymore because they haven't done anything since 2004 to 3 when they made the Super Bowl against the Bucs. But there's a lot of different ways I can go here. I am going to go with Marcus Allen as my first one. I think that's a definite one. I think as receiver, I could go Tim Brown, but I'm going to go Fred Biletnikoff. I think he's a bit of an older reach, but I think with how good he was, he got the college receiver award named after him. I think for the best quarterback, there's Rich Gannon, there's Ken Stabler. You mentioned the guy that you picked, and I think I'm going to go Ken Stabler. I think I'm pretty sure he won an MVP as a Raider, and I think he's probably the best quarterback they've had in their franchise. And then for the last one, he might be the best player they've had. I'm going to go with Howie Long, one of the more underrated edge rushers, I feel, in like the old years. But I think Howie Long was just really good when he was around, and I think kind of personified like the toughness and it's the Dan Campbell, I'm gonna bite your kneecaps, but they actually do it and actually go to jail type of Raiders.
All right, let's look at the NBA now. We've got 3 different teams here. We've got Oklahoma City / the Supersonics, the Orlando Magic, and the Toronto Raptors. So for the Thunder and the Sonics, this was the easiest one for me. Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, Shawn Kemp, and Gary Payton. I really didn't think about this one too often. Durant's the weird one because he had the really ugly exit with them, but he's the best player on that list. I don't think it's enough to take him off. And plus, he played with both the Sonics and the Thunder, so that's got to go for bonus points, right? For the Magic, Dwight Howard was an easy one. Penny Hardaway was an easy one. I wasn't really sure what to do after that because there are some great players who have played for this team, but for only a short amount of time. You don't think of Shaquille O'Neal as an Orlando Magic player. You don't really think of Tracy McGrady as an Orlando Magic player, but I still felt like I had to put them because with T-Mac, his best years were in Orlando in the early 2000s. And then with Shaq, again, you don't necessarily think of him as with the Orlando Magic. When you think of Shaq, you probably think first with the Lakers. But Shaq was really the first guy to build the Magic up to a great team. When they drafted him, they were still relatively new, and they made the finals during his tenure, and they recently retired his jersey. So again, I feel like that kind of has to go for something. And then the Raptors, I went with Kyle Lowry, Kawhi Leonard, Vince Carter, and DeMar DeRozan. All certainly recent names, but Kyle Lowry's done so much for that team. Most Raptors fans will tell you he's the greatest player in their franchise history. Kawhi Leonard won them the championship. And then other than those two, I think Vince Carter and DeMar DeRozan would probably be the next two. DeRozan gave this team some great years, as did, of course, Vince Carter in the early 2000s. You can make the case for a guy like Chris Bosh, but I think if you compare him and DeRozan, DeMar was here longer, and he was probably better than Chris Bosh was. So that's why I lean DeRozan for the last spot.
Yeah, I'm gonna start off the Thunder and the Sonic. I do think it's pretty easy. It is. I think KD is just the best player, period, that they've ever had. I think MVP Russ is a monster. Sean Kemp and Gary Payton. I think those are the big four. There was a small part of me that wanted to say Serge Ibaka just because I really like that guy, Serge Ibaka, my boy. But I don't think he's top four on their Mount Rushmore. I do think those are the four that are going to be on most Thunder fans that you'll see. I'm going to go to the Raptors next. I think it's the same. Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, Vince Carter, Kawhi Leonard. I did think about Chris Bosh for a while, and I thought about not having Kawhi Leonard because he only played the 1 year here. But I think that 1 year was special for Kawhi. And the Raptors in general, where they got their first championship, not just for a city, but for an entire country. Kawhi came in, he had the 4 bounce drop against the Sixers, and it might have been a more weaker Warriors team they played, but I think they earned that championship, and it's definitely deserved for Kawhi to be on there, because I think every Raptors fan thanks Kawhi for what he did, even though he was there for a year. I think Kyle Lowry was probably their best player they've ever had. Not best, but that's their boy. That's Kyle Lowry. That's Kyle Lowry's country. As for the Magic, there's a few different ways you could have went about this. Dwight Howard, first guy I ever think about as a Magic. Penny Hardaway as well. Those are the first two that come to my mind, and it's like you have to go with those four. Or those two. Sorry. The other two, I do think I went same as you, but I do think it's a really big question with Shaq, Trace McGrady. Part of me wanted to go. I often do think of Shaq as a Magic. He was drafted by them, brought them to the finals, was there for a good couple years, and I think he kind of put them on the map, you know. And Trace McGrady kind of was there, helped along the way. Not along the way, but you know what I mean. I think we went the same with those three, but I do think like the Raptors is a really interesting question because they've only had players the past 20 or so years, and looking like in their past and like even into their future, like if Pascal Siakam stays on the team for longer, does he last? If Fred VanVleet didn't leave, would he end up getting in the top four? You know, I do think a lot of those three teams have a lot of question marks on. Are these like does SGA end up on that top four? You know, we'll have to wait and see.
All right, let's move over to the MLB. We've got the Tigers, the Phillies, and the Rockies. I'll start with Detroit. I wanted to avoid using super old players here, but Ty Cobb has by far the highest WAR in team history, so I felt wrong not including him. We also have Al Kaline, Alan Trammell, and for the last spot, I did go with Miguel Cabrera. He's a little bit lower than a few guys who didn't make the list in terms of WAR, but Prime Miggy was a different animal. He deserves to be here. For the Phillies, I feel like there were two easy ones with Mike Schmidt and Steve Carlton. Didn't really have to think about those. But for the last two spots, it was a little bit trickier. I did kind of turn back the clock with this first one, going with Robin Roberts. He had some great years there for a while. And then the last spot, I originally had Chase Utley penciled in here. Utley's WAR was amongst the all-time leaders in team history, and I felt like including one of the modern guys from the 2008 team made a lot of sense. Utley was the original name I had on my list, but I scratched it for Ryan Howard because I think Howard was a little bit more one of the faces of this team over Utley. Howard played his entire career with the Phillies. Utley did not. Howard's prime was a little bit better than Utley's as well, even if Chase Utley was probably the better player. I also thought about Jimmy Rollins as well, but for similar reasons. His prime wasn't as dominant as Ryan Howard. He played on other teams after the Phillies as well. I feel like Ryan Howard was the guy with those mid-2000s Phillies teams, even if you can argue that guys like Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley were better Major League Baseball players. And then for the Rockies, I went with Todd Helton and Larry Walker as the two easy picks. I had a little bit harder at the time with the last two, but I went modern with Nolan Arenado and Troy Tulowitzki. I looked up the Rockies' all-time leader in terms of pitching WAR, not really expecting to put a pitcher on the list because it is the Rockies. I was surprised that Ubaldo Jimenez was in first place, so I figured, yeah, no pitchers on this list. I think Kyle Freeland was in second place, so that just kind of goes to show how bad the Rockies' all-time pitching has been. So, yeah, no pitchers for the Rockies.
Yeah, so I think Tigers to start off with, you look at all the older players. I think Ty Cobb has to be on there. He's one of the best kind of in that era, you know. He's with how far apart he is war-wise, I think he's got in. Because some players weren't there for the longest time, but who I do want to put is two more not in black and white players. I'm putting Miggy on that list, and I know he left after the 2012 season, and we'll see how your take is on it. But I'm going to put Verlander in there. He was there. He got them to the World Series, and I think he's got it on the list. I think he's the best pitcher in the history. Maybe not best pitcher, but he's up there. I think he won a few Cy Youngs while he was in Detroit. I think he's got to be in there. And for the last one, I went through a few different guys. Lou Whitaker, I think, was a guy who I had on my mind. But I'm gonna go kind of that same era, played a little longer. I'm gonna go with Alan Trammell. I think he played really well when he was a Tiger, just shy of Whitaker in terms of WAR. But I think what he did while he was on the Tigers for the damn near, I don't know, 20 years he played. I never won MVP, but he was on there for a while. He got second in 1987. I don't know who won it, but Alan Trammell almost did it. I'm going to go the Rockies first, because I'm going to say my team for last, because I did the same for the Rockies. Todd Helton, Larry Walker, Hall of Famer guys. I think they got to be in there. Nolan Arenado, I know he wasn't there for that long, but when he was in Colorado, he was a monster. And then I put Troy Tulowitzki on there. The big shortstop, I think he definitely had to be on that list. There was a part of me that thought maybe a Charlie Blackmon, maybe a German Marquez. I thought, maybe the 29-year-old with the most wins ever or something would be on that list, but no pitchers getting on there. And Charlie Blackmon, I think he might be, if you ask a Rockies fan, ahead of maybe Tulowitzki or maybe even Arenado, just because of how kind of that whole fiasco went. And then in terms of the Phillies, boy, oh boy, oh boy. There's a lot of ways I can go here. I'm going to stick with Mike Schmidt. I think that's probably the best Philly of all time, and I'm gonna stick with it. Steve Carlton's a guy where I'm like, I should probably put him on here because he played with us for good 13 or so years. He won 3 Cy Youngs with us, but there's also a part of me that says maybe not, and my brain decided to keep him on the list. I almost put him off, but I'm gonna keep him on there. And I was mistaken. He won 4 Cy Youngs in Philly from 1972 all the way to 1986. Wow, this guy played 20. Wow. Okay. Anyways, the rest of the list, I think you have to go into that 2010s Phillies, not 2010s, but like the 2011 Phillies, one little series. Chase Utley's on there, Jimmy Rollins on there. Bobby Abreu comes to mind. You said Ryan Howard, he always comes to mind. A lot of the pitchers in that era always comes to mind. Cole Hamels is on there. Cliff Lee, Roy Halladay, lots of those guys. I think all of them kind of come to mind. I am going to say I did put Ryan Howard on here. I'm going to keep him on there. So I do think he kind of personified that era of the Phillies. And I think he was, like, Jimmy Rollins says MVP, but, like, should he really have an MVP? Chase Utley kind of played half his career with Philly, half his career with the Cardinals, and lots of different guys who you could put as that fourth one. And God, did I want to put Bryce Harper on there really badly. It's not long enough. He only joined us in 2019. It's not long enough, but I think if he wins MVP this year, and if he can win us a World Series, I think he's 1,000% on that Mount Rushmore. I think he has to be, because that 2022 run where he took us to the World Series as the 6th seed, that was some of the best baseball I've watched in my life. Not just for Bryce Harper, but that was fun. But as the last one, I'm gonna hold off on Bryce Harper, and I think I'm gonna stick with Jimmy Rollins. Not because he's better than Chase Utley. I think Chase Utley's better, but I think Jimmy Rollins, while he was on the field, he did a lot for us, and I think kind of playing that middle infield, I think playing on our team for 14 years, he does have MVP. It might not be the most deserved MVP, but it's an MVP, and I think he has all the accolades. 4-time Gold Glove. He helped us win the 2008 World Series, and I think he is just probably one of the more Philly kind of guys you'll see. Player-wise, might not be the best, might just be the fielding first kind of guy, but I think he has that mentality, and he has that MVP, so why not? Should it probably be Chase Utley? Yeah, but I think after Bryce wins another MVP or gets us a ring, he'll take over Jimmy Rollins' spot.
All right, good stuff. The Verlander choice is certainly interesting. I don't really have a major gripe against it because he was so good for a decade, and he's probably at worst the second best pitcher in team history, maybe first, so I can't really argue against it. That'll wrap up the episode. Hope everybody enjoyed. If you have one final thing before you leave us, what would you like to tell everyone?
That the Phillies are the best team in baseball. Ball go boom. Braves, sorry guys, not going to happen.
Ball go boom, kids. Make sure to hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe if you're new. Peace out.